the man who accidentally opened the Berlin Wall. I want to ask you something. What if the most important political event of the last 100 years wasn't planned by anyone? What if the moment that ended the Cold War, reunified a continent, and collapsed the Soviet Union happened because one man didn't read a piece of paper? What if, and I mean what if, that man knew exactly what he was doing? We're going to get into all of that. But first, look, before we go any further, if a story about one man accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, bringing down the Iron Curtain doesn't make you want to hit subscribe, I don't know what will. Seriously, hit the like button, tell a friend, tell a stranger, tell someone at a bus stop, because we do this every week. Real stories, stranger than fiction, history that sounds made up, but absolutely isn't. Okay, like, subscribe, done? Good. Now where were we? The most important press conference in modern history. I have to be upfront with you about something. I'm not German. I know, shocking. I'll give you a moment. What this means, practically speaking, is that at several points in this story, I'm going to attempt to pronounce some German words, and I want to reassure you, I have practiced. I have genuinely, sincerely practiced. I said some of these words to my own bathroom mirror this morning with confidence that I can describe as misplaced. So if at any point it sounds like I'm trying to start a car that won't quite turn over, just know that in my head it was perfect. We'll get through it together. Right, now that we've established some limitations, let me tell you about the most important press conference in modern history. It lasted about 45 minutes. It was broadcast live on East German state television, which, if you know anything about East Germany, was not exactly known for breaking news. This was not a network built on surprises. It was a Thursday night, November 9th, 1989, and the man standing at that podium had not read a piece of paper in his hand. That's where we're starting, because everything, and I mean everything that follows, hinges on that fact. But before we get onto the podium, I need you to understand what the Berlin Wall was. You know, what it actually meant. Because I think most people know it as a symbol, a photograph, punchline to that history class. And that really doesn't do it justice. It does it a massive disservice. The Berlin Wall wasn't just a wall, it was a system. It went up in August 1961. It stretched for over 100 miles. Not just through the middle of a city, though it did that too. It cut streets in half. It separated neighbors overnight. It literally ran through the middle of living rooms in some places. People woke up one morning, an ordinary Tuesday morning, and their street, their bakery, their mother's house was on the other side of a barrier that hadn't existed the night before. And over the following years, they didn't just build a wall, they built what they called the Todesterfein, the death strip, a no man's land between two walls, floodlit at night, patrolled by guards with shoot-to-kill orders, laced with tripwires, with carefully raked gravel so guards could see your footprints, and at certain points, with automatic firing devices that would trigger if anything moved through them. Between 1961 and 1989, somewhere between 140 and 200 people were killed trying to cross it. People tried in hot air balloons, tunnels, hidden compartments in the boots of cars. One man, and I genuinely love this man's spirit, tried to cross in a modified surfboard. They were desperate, genuinely, achingly desperate. Because East Germany wasn't just a different country, it was a different reality. The Stasi, East German's secret police, employed one informant for every 63 citizens. That is, by some estimates, the highest surveillance ratio of any government in human history. Your neighbor might be reporting on you, your teacher, even your spouse. People were arrested for telling jokes, for owning a typewriter without registering it, for listening to Western radio stations. The wall wasn't keeping the West out, it was keeping the East Germans in. And the people who built it knew exactly why, because in the 12 years before the wall went up, 3.5 million East Germans had already fled to the West. They were losing their country, person by person, and the wall was their solution. So when I tell you that in 1989, that wall came down, I need you to feel the weight of that. This wasn't a policy change, this wasn't a diplomatic agreement, this was the physical, concrete, literal collapse of a 28-year imprisonment. And it happened because one man at one podium who hadn't read a piece of paper. The autumn of 1989, the Soviet Union under Gorbachev is cracking. His reforms, his glasnost, perestroika, sent a signal across the entire Eastern Bloc. Moscow might not send the tanks this time. And the people of Eastern Europe have heard that signal loud and clear. Poland has already held partially free elections. Hungary has opened its border with Austria. And here's the thing about that. The thing about the Hungarian border, well, that East Germans noticed, because Hungary was a communist country, East Germans could travel to on holiday. And suddenly, if you drove to Hungary and walked to the Austrian border, you could just leave. Tens of thousands did in the summer of 1989 alone. Back in East Germany, the protests are growing. Every Monday in Leipzig, people are gathering for what they called the Montagsdemonstration, the Monday demonstrations. I'm going to call that from here on out for both our sakes. They start small, then they're tens of thousands strong, then 50,000 strong. Then 1 October 9th, there are 70,000 people in the streets of Leipzig, and the army is surrounding the city and the leadership in East Berlin, genuinely seriously considering a Tananian-style crackdown. It doesn't happen. Nobody quite knows why, whether the generals refused, whether a last-minute phone call from a local conductor named Kurt Masur managed to defuse it, whether the leadership simply lost its nerve when they looked at the size of the crowd, but it doesn't happen. And that moment where guns didn't fire, is truly the moment the regime starts to truly wobble. By November, the protests are still everywhere. The leadership is full panic mode. Which brings us to Günther Schabowski. Schabowski is, by November 1989, a senior member of East German Politburo. He's the party spokesman, which in communist state means he's the man they send out to manage a narrative. He's not a maverick, he's not a secret reformer, he is by all accounts a loyal party functionary who has spent his entire career saying what he's told to say. And on the 9th of November, there is a closed Politburo meeting. The leadership, desperately trying to release some form of pressure, has approved a new travel regulation. It's a significant one. It would allow East Germans to apply for visas to travel to West, not freely, through a process, with paperwork, but it's a real concession. And crucially, this matters. Remember this, it was meant to be announced in a managed way. Instructions were supposed to go out to the border guards before any public announcement. It was meant to come into effect the following day. Schabowski, at the final part of the meeting, he walks in late. His colleague hands him a note, a short document outlining the new regulation. Schabowski glances at it, stuffs it in his papers, and walks into the live press conference. International wire reporters are in that room, cameras rolling, East German television broadcasting live. He fields questions for about 45 minutes. Standard stuff, nothing unusual. Then, near the end, an Italian journalist named Riccardo Ehrman raises his hand. Ehrman asks about the travel regulations, and Schabowski pulls out a piece of paper. He reads from it. East German citizens will be able to apply for private travel. Visas will be granted promptly. The press corps started scribbling. Schabowski stumbles slightly over the language. Then a reporter in the room calls out, "When does this take effect?" Schabowski looks at the paper. There's no date. Nobody told him. He doesn't know. He has no idea that the border guards haven't been briefed yet. He has no idea the whole thing was supposed to be rolled out carefully the next day. He pauses. You can watch this moment on YouTube right now, tonight. You can put it up and you can see it. That fraction of a second where a man is simply looking at a piece of paper and finding no answer. And then he says 3 words. Ab sofort onversuchlich. Immediately, without delay. The room erupts. Within the hour, West German television, which East Germans could pick up on their sets, is broadcasting the news. The wall is open. You can leave now. That was never what the Politburo intended. They wanted a slow, managed release valve, a bureaucratic process with forms, queues, and rubber stamps. What Schabowski had just announced, accidentally, carelessly, because he hadn't read the full context of the note in his hand, was effectively unrestricted, immediate freedom of movement. And East Berliners heard it. They started gathering at the checkpoints, hundreds at first, 10,000s. Border guards who had received absolutely no instructions, because the memo was supposed to reach them first, were getting frantic phone calls from commanders who were getting frantic phone calls from people watching the news on television. Nobody knew what to do. At the Bornholmer Strasse checkpoint, a guard named Harold Jager is watching his monitors. The crowd outside is now thousands deep. They're not throwing anything, they're not being violent, they're just pressing forward, quietly chanting, "Put off. Open the gate." Jager calls his superiors. No instructions, no calls. He calls again. Nothing. His guards are starting to look at him. The crowd is at the barrier now. He has 2 options. Open fire on 1,000 of unarmed civilians, or open the gate. At 11:30 p.m., Harold Jager makes a decision that no one above him had the courage to make. He opens the gate. And East Berlin pours into the West Berlin. People who hadn't seen their families in decades. People who had never in their adult lives been allowed to simply walk to the other side of their own city. People weeping in the middle of the road, embracing total strangers. Standing on top of the wall with hammers and chisels, taking chunks out of it with their bare hands. West Berlin is handing out champagne, flowers at midnight. A city, after 28 years, becoming whole again. Every other checkpoint falls, one by one, through the night. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because the official story, the story that Schabowski told for the rest of his life, was that it was a mistake. He hadn't been fully briefed, he misread the document, he didn't know the transition arrangements hadn't been made. It was an accident that changed history, but Schabowski's wife, Irena, told a different story. She said that in private, her husband had spoken differently, that he had understood at some level what he was doing, that a man as intelligent as Günther Schabowski, a man who had spent 30 years navigating the razor-sharp, unforgiving politics of East German communism, simply did not accidentally say something like that on live television at all. There's another detail. Riccardo Ehrman, the Italian journalist who asked the question, later admitted he received a phone call earlier that day. Someone had tipped him off. They told him to ask specifically about the travel regulations at the press conference. He never said who called him. By November 1989, Schabowski had already privately concluded, this is documented, that the regime was finished. He had seen the protests, he'd finished the intelligence reports, he knew what was unraveling in the Soviet Union. He had also quietly, in the weeks before, been in contact with reform-minded figures within the party. So here's a question I keep coming back to. What if the accident wasn't? What if Schabowski looked at the piece of paper, knew exactly what he said, understood exactly what would happen the moment those words left his mouth on live television, and decided, in that fraction of a second, that this was the cleanest possible way to do something that needed to be doing? No armed uprising, no crackdown, no soldiers in the street, no bloodshed, just one tired bureaucrat squinting at a piece of paper, saying, "Immediately," and letting the people do the rest. He never changed his public story. He took whatever the truth was with him to the grave. Günther Schabowski never became a hero in that conventional sense. He was later convicted, along with other Politburo members, for his role in the shoot-to-kill orders that had governed the war for 28 years. He spent his life in the later years, doing quiet penance, meeting with the families of those who died trying to cross. He seemed, by most accounts, genuinely haunted by it. But at the night of the November 9th, 1989, whether by accident or by some quiet, uncelebrated act of courage that he could never publicly admit to, he stood at a podium, looked into a camera, and gave 16 million people their lives back. 3 words: ab sofort onversuchtlich. Immediately, without delay. The wall came down, Germany was reunited less than a year later. The Soviet Union collapsed 2 years later. The entire post-war order, 40 years of the Iron Curtain, of nuclear standoff, of continent cut in two, began to unravel from a press conference that a man may or may not have been prepared for. History doesn't always look like a battle. Sometimes it looks like a bureaucrat at a podium shuffling his notes in a room full of journalists, saying the wrong thing exactly at the right time, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. Thank you.